Home, brothers. So, libertarianism. Libertarianism is a false ism, made-up thing, just like a special white person, Karl Marx, and Moses Hess, his agent from Rothschild, had him invent some bogus communism, and then he wrote 80 books saying there's communism, then there's capitalism. And before Marx even started to write all this drivel, there was not even such a word in the vocabulary. He also tried to create these other words, bourgeoisie, proletariat, all these other made-up words. And the idea is to get us battling over the system instead of arresting the corrupt officials. And what that means is, if we imagine we've got 5 or 6 brothers in a room, and we want to decide, like, are we going to use money or not, or are we sharing this or not, or do we want to have a looser system like a university, or do we want a tighter system where you get charged for every little thing you use? It definitely depends on some circumstances. And I want you to look into the Shakers, because the Shakers had communist communes where there was no money there, and they had a capitalist one, so to speak, where they would sell things and get money from people from the outside and probably pay bills and taxes and other stuff according to whatever conditions they're in. And they all had the same leader, Ann Lee, and Ann Lee never thought that communism or capitalism was even an issue. It just wasn't discussed. It's like, that's not what having these brotherhoods and sisterhoods is about. It's a technical detail that you work out when you get everybody together and you're all basically clean and you're working for the good of the community. And unfortunately, in our society, the wolves are guarding the sheep, and the fox is guarding the hen house. And until you take those people out and you get the corruption out, we're not even at the stage of talking about systems. Now, to be fair, I think a lot of people who are honestly into libertarianism, they're into this idea that we have the freedom of choice, and then therefore we are really making moral decisions for ourselves. And this is a true part of like being a yogi. Like, would I isolate myself in such a way where I have no temptations and then put a crown on my head and say, I don't sin? Well, I think most of us could agree that we want to have a normal amount of temptation and not falsely created temptations. And we also wouldn't want to take all the temptations away, because then the challenge seems to be gone, and the import of morality itself is sort of missing. As Confucius said about this, was, you don't really know who's a thief until people start starving. And when people start starving, you see who is willing to steal stuff and who isn't, who has it in their bones to steal stuff and who simply cannot do it. They don't have that evil thing in them that allows them to steal stuff. So that's an important point. But unfortunately, that for greater society, libertarianism, if given that we have a good government and corruption is taken care of, libertarianism would probably function more or less fine, I guess. Taken to the extreme where everything is private, and they say everything has to be done with money or through exchange, then it just seems annoying. It's like, what if I grew up in a family that was libertarian, and then you want to have some water, and then they got a meter on the water, and they're charging you cha-ching for everything you're doing, and then I think a looser system is more desirable among generally moral people. You don't need to nickel and dime them like that. And interestingly, the whole libertarian idea has some fallacies in it, and I want to say number one fallacy is legalization. Legalization is a fallacy in the sense that we should legalize drugs because the war on drugs is unsuccessful and people need to choose for themselves and all this other stuff. The same arguments could be made to legalize murder. And I could say, well, murdering in back alleys is really dirty and dangerous, and we might as well regulate it and tax murdering. And who knows, maybe murdering gives you physical exercise. There's some benefits to it. And you could literally take these articles for legalization of, drug marijuana. I think we're all for legalization of, non-drug hemp to make clothes and paper. That's a no-brainer. But the legalization of these drugs, wouldn't that mean that our leaders are people that don't see a moral problem with the abuse of medicines? Medicines are things we use when we're sick. They're not things that we use to, make me feel, funny, or, that's something only bored city people with not enough physical labor would even get into thinking like that. And it's a similar problem with the wankers. And why was porn illegal and prostitution more illegal in our ancestors' days? Because I think the government was less corrupt and these people felt the responsibility to actually manage something. I think if we hire the government to govern, then that's what they should do. And the libertarian thing is sort of a fallacy. They say the government shouldn't govern anything, and that doesn't make any sense. And there's always going to be people governing things. Now, if the good people put down their arms and they say, we're not governing anything, then you just have all the criminals and weirdos and thugs, and then they've got arms, they've got the power to physically jump in and govern you. Whether you call it government or not, it's still coercion. That's the way it is, and your society ends up being run in this fragmented, anarchic way with this and that mafia in different factions, and it's all because they have varying degrees of military force behind them. I noticed too, like I have a block with Brother Catfish. He says, well, I think race mixing should be allowed. Well, I said, what do you mean allowed? Is there no government? Will there be no governing of the gene pool and our races and the diversity that God gave us? Like, well, I think you can choose to not race mix. You could tell your children not to race mix, but it's not okay for the government to pass a law. And I've heard this argument a lot on a lot of things. They'll say, you can govern things any way you want, but it's not right if you let the government govern things. And that's a contradiction in terms. So, but naturally the reason people are moving to these weird positions is because the government is so corrupt, and that's why people are saying, let's let other people govern stuff, other structures in societies, churches, families and stuff. Let's let them do the government more and kick out this corrupt government, which is our secular international banker government that's up there now, that's would rather us not govern all the bad things that they're trying to do, like selling drugs and selling people, especially women and little boys, and all of these other very disgusting and disturbing things are all moving on the path of legalization. And why is libertarianism run? Libertarianism, and we would say sort of right-wing capitalists, anarcho-capitalism, or all these things sort of in the same branch. Why are all of these people Jewish? Like Ayn Rand, Nathaniel Branden, and actually all the people in that circle, including the Fed boss, what's-his-face, Alan Greenspan, all the people in the freaking Fed, the money people. Of course, those are all the special, the chosen people. And then Ludwig von Mises is a special white person. So is the man who funds LouRockwell.com, and so is like Alex Jones' wife, and these people funding many people who are sort of proposing libertarian solutions. So I want to say to libertarians watching this, I think you have a good heart, and a lot of you are honest enough, but just don't fall for these tricks. The trick where we're supposed to argue about the system before we've even discussed corruption, and that's not the correct order. That's cart before horse, and that's not going to happen in our brotherhood, because we will have a very strong, good group of men, and we're okay. So we'll be at the stage where we will discuss the system at some point, but we won't need to go arrest these corrupt officials. I'll just give you a couple examples. If you're living in the United States, you should immediately arrest Dov Zakheim. I mean, how is that man walking around free? There's so many of them. Ronald S. Lauder, Rahm Emanuel. These are convicted, sick criminals. Dov Zakheim stole, I think, like 10% of the entire world's money supply when he was in control of the Pentagon purse strings, saying that he lost 2 or 3 trillion US dollars. And oops, they're all in Israel now, or somewhere, all sort of spread around among his friends in the Chabad Lubavitch and among his rabbi friends. Yes, and he's an Israeli citizen, a rabbi, and he was running the freaking Pentagon. And how can you say you even have a country at that point when you're corrupt to that point? It's not even discussable. Communism or capitalism? In America, the IPAC chooses who the candidates are. That is, the Israeli government chooses who is a candidate, and then the Israeli government via Voxio counts the votes. They physically tell you who won and who lost. That's not even an American company. The Rothschilds in London print your money. Now, this is why I think Jews have gotten heavily involved in libertarianism, because if you accept libertarian propositions to privatize stuff and legalize stuff, then it's just going to come down to military force and money. And that's exactly what the bankers have. They want to set up a system or a thing where they win more, where they have more voice. I don't think Ron Paul is our answer. He never was. His so-called solution is also a system solution. He never said anything wrong about Emanuel or Zakheim or any of the major, huge, high criminals in the U.S. system. He simply says, well, we need to change the system. Don't worry about these corrupt people stealing all our money and enslaving the population like Rahm Emanuel with Freddie Mac. I mean, come on. How many? He stole like 1/3 of every American's pensions. Just that one guy. And then he becomes the Secretary of State under Obama. I mean, give me a break. You're going to let that guy stand up there, and then we're supposed to sit here with Ron Paul. Vote Ron Paul! All the votes are private. Voxio is going to count the votes. Oh yeah, Ron Paul is approved by IPAC. I mean, just you're not getting to the center of the issue by talking about the system at all. His proposition was the gold standard. Now, who controls gold? Yeah, you got it. It's all these same bankers, these people. For example, 80-some% of the world's gold is controlled by a single chosen guy, Peter Monk, in the company Barrick Gold. I mean, when you propose the gold standard, you would make Peter Monk the supreme ruler of practically the entire world. If the U.S. dollar was run on that, I'm just pointing this out. I would be pro-gold too if you didn't rip down mountains and ruin people's lives and screw the environment to get it. And if the people who owned the gold were actually North Americans. That would be a good start. How about the Bundesbank in Germany? How about we have some Germans run that? How about we have some Chinese run the China Bank? First things first, libertarians. And don't give me all these spurious arguments about legalization, because we can legalize smashing your face in, and you got to be careful about that. You don't want to, you should tax it. You should tax smashing my face in. Don't be an idiot. Take all those arguments, test it. Is it falsifiable? Yes, it is. So these arguments are spurious. They don't work. The big question is the leaders. Om to everyone.